So let me introduce Bob Wold to you, please. Bob's talk is called Suicide or Psychedelics. Bob is the founder and the president of Clusterbusters, Inc. It's a 501c3 organization, nonprofit charitable organization, dedicated to the research of cluster headaches and to support people with cluster headaches and their family. Based in the greater Chicago area with his wife and 4 children, Mr. Wold has talked to thousands of cluster sufferers. In fact, over 25 years of his adult life was burdened with severe cluster headaches that were resistant to all standard treatments. That all changed after he tried psilocybin, which has helped him regain control over this illness. Now, hundreds and perhaps thousands of other cluster headache patients all over the world have tried this solution. He and Clusterbusters are currently involved in pursuing the approvals for the clinical research required to allow these much-needed treatments to become available for everyone. Treatments that far exceed anything currently available through conventional medicine. Treatments that can eliminate the suicide option that far too many people still choose. So with that, I will turn you over to Bob Wold. Thank you, Bob, for joining us.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. Glad you all stuck around. I know you're probably thinking they saved the best for last, but I want you to know ahead of time that I was scheduled for early yesterday. So the pressure was on the last guy. So I'm here to talk a little bit about the story that is behind Clusterbusters and what's been going on for the last few years. When I formed this group, had I known what was in store for me, I probably would have given the name of the group a little bit more thought. It was kind of a hurry up, pick a name, let's get moving. What most of this involves is the work around cluster headaches. And a problem with that is just the word headaches really doesn't describe what is going on with a cluster headache attack. So if I can show you a short clip here, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what a cluster headache attack is. I think it'll put a lot of the rest of this presentation into perspective. This is a short clip that was about 45 minutes long. It's been shut down to about 3 minutes. And it shows a man at the very beginning of the cluster attack and all the way through to the end, but obviously shortened. This is a friend of mine, his name is Chuck. He was at a convention for cluster headache people, and he agreed to be filmed. One of the things that he asked for was for someone else to be in the room and to actually hold him here. In most cases, when people have cluster headaches, they'll go off by themselves, they'll go up into their bedroom. They really don't like their family seeing this. Or anybody else. So it's a little bit strange that there's somebody else actually even in the picture with him here. One of the things he was concerned with was embarrassing himself, damaging the hotel room, and a lot of things that he probably shouldn't have been concerned with. But you can see the type of pain that's involved in these cluster headache attacks. He's not smothering him there. What he's doing is he's helping him hold on an oxygen mask. People with cluster headaches breathe pure oxygen if they have it around, and that will help shorten the attack in many cases. It may shorten a 45-minute or an hour attack down to 20 minutes or half an hour. Chuck has had these headaches for over 20 years, and he gets normally about 6 or 8 of these attacks a day, around the clock. One trigger with cluster headaches is once you fall asleep, just about when you're ready to hit REM sleep, it will trigger an attack. So a lot of cluster sufferers go years without any real good sleep. And in many cases, they really fear going to sleep because they know it's around the corner an hour later.
Water.
One of the things about cluster headaches is once you feel that it's about to come on, I mean, there are a couple telltale signs that you will feel, and probably within 1 or 2 minutes, you're in a full-blown attack, and it normally ends as quickly as it begins. And then after that's over, we're supposed to go back to our life, I guess. So, how I got started in this was when I was in my late 20s and starting to raise a family. That's my oldest son there right now, and just to give you an idea how long this story has been forming. That's my youngest daughter there, and right now she's a grown woman out shopping with my credit card. So I'll try to speed this along here. One day I was playing football out in my backyard with my son, and I got a terrible headache. I hadn't had many headaches up to that point. I hadn't suffered from migraines. When I would get a headache, I usually wouldn't even take aspirin for it. But this one particular day I was outside, started feeling some pain, came in, sat down, and 10 minutes later I was writhing on the floor, not knowing exactly what was going on. And it took me 4 years to actually find out before I actually even got a diagnosis as cluster headaches. Some people go 8 or 10 years before they're actually told exactly what they do have. I went to all the eye doctors, they told me they had the answer, and I obviously had a scratched retina, so they put glasses on me for a year. Went to a dentist. He pulled some teeth after doing some root canals. That didn't do it. Went to a chiropractor who actually told me that if he couldn't fix my headaches in 2 treatments, then I probably had a brain tumor. And after 2 treatments and the headaches getting worse, I was thinking, well, I must have a brain tumor. So kept looking around for other doctors. I finally got a cluster headache diagnosis. That was after not knowing what they were and not ever hearing that word for 4 years. After that, I went through 20 years of cycles. There are 2 different forms of cluster headaches. There are episodic headaches where you get 1 or 2 cycles a year and you may go 4 or 6 weeks, and then the cycle completely stops and you go several months without any headaches at all. There's also a chronic form which people have, and they don't have that break in between the cycles. But I used to have 2 cycles a year that would last 3 or 4 months, and just did a fast calculation and figured that in that 20 years I probably had about 18,000 of those attacks that you saw. So I started seeing many, many doctors and being prescribed many different medications. I was actually on 75 different medications and a lot of different combinations. I tried all of these in many different combinations. Some of those are a little bit interesting up there. You might see that I was once prescribed cocaine drops, fentanyl patches, which is used for cancer patients for the type of pain that they have, and were pretty much useless for my headaches. Capsaicin applications, that was an interesting one where you take capsaicin, which is actually made from red peppers, and you would put the gel on the end of a 6-inch long Q-tip and put it in the back of my sinus cavity and swab that on the back of some nerves in the back of the sinus cavity. And you would have to do that 2 or 3 times a day for a couple of weeks to see if it would reduce the amount of substance P in your system, which is what transmits pain signals. But that one didn't work very well, and it was very painful. Here's the rest of my list of 75 on the left-hand side. Couldn't fit them all into one page. And then tried everything that was always suggested to me. Every time I would talk to somebody about my headaches, they would always know what I would need, take 2 aspirin and they should go away. But tried a lot of different things. At one point, I was getting attacks around the clock. Every 2 hours, it would last for an hour. So I was getting 12 attacks a day, and I had gone through a full month of that. And I had a decision to make. I was approved for 3 different operations. The gamma knife was what they were just getting started. I think they had worked on 2 or 3 cluster patients at this point, where they shoot the radiation into the brain. Microvascular decompression, where they drill a quarter-size hole in the back of the skull and wrap the vein and the nerves there with Teflon. And also I could choose radiofrequency nerve ablation, where they would just burn the nerves in my face. The problem with that is my headaches would switch sides from cycle to cycle, so they would have had to have done that on both sides. And so I would have been walking around like you feel when you go to the dentist and they give you the Novocaine, so my entire face would have been numb. And I had one other option, which unfortunately a lot of people take, and that was suicide. They don't keep any records of exactly how many people have committed suicide with cluster headaches, but there have been a couple of surveys done. One that was just finished and was reported at the Headache Congress in Philadelphia last month, where 2.2% of the people that they talked to had tried to commit suicide. We had also done a poll earlier, which was hosted on Irwin, who has helped us along the way here. And in our survey, a little over 9% had attempted suicide. And I think that might be because most of the time when the people come to me, they've already run out of all the options with their doctors. Most of the time I get the emails and the phone calls telling me that I'm their last option, or Clusterbusters is their last option. So those were the decisions I had to make. And the decision I did make was to check out the cyber world to see what else might be out there. There are message boards online for people with cluster headaches. And I had been talking to some people there, and over the years I had talked to a lot of people with cluster headaches. And there were some interesting things that were just starting to be discussed online. So I ended up with a new medical team, and my doctors were named Flash and Pink Shark Mark, actually. What they were discussing, and what I just started discussing with them, was when people have these headaches, what they do, if there's any change at all, if they normally have a headache at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, and if it doesn't arrive on schedule, they'll try to figure out what it was that might have changed things for them. And this guy named Flash, who was in his mid-20s with cluster headaches, came to this message board and asked if anyone had heard anything about LSD relieving cluster headaches. And unfortunately, what still happens today when people want to discuss it is an awful lot of people immediately jumped on him, thinking that he was just there to score LSD. This is not a drug site. We don't supply any drugs. So he ended up with getting a lot of flack for that. But one guy wanted to listen to him and discuss it, and this was Mark, who lived in the Dominican Republic. And what they did was start looking for any evidence that was out there that might tie LSD as a treatment to cluster headaches or any type of headache treatment. And one thing that they found out was, one of the things that Albert Hofmann was working on when he discovered LSD for Sandoz was headache treatments. And LSD and psilocybin are both very close to the normal treatments that are used for headaches, the ergotamines. So they're all in the same family. So there was some evidence out there, and we started looking more and more into it, seeing if there was any more evidence that we could find. What happened was then a few brave souls decided to try the treatment. And when I decided to try it the first time, my new doctor's orders were I was supposed to stop all the medications that I was on that might interfere with the psilocybin. I was supposed to consume 1.5 grams of dried mushrooms and wait 5 days and repeat. And what happened was my adjustment to that was after I tried it the first time, it was such an incredible change and so profoundly different from any treatment I had tried for 20 years that first thing I did was go through the next 12 hours without a headache for the first time in over a month. And so what I did then was I used the other 1.5 grams of dried mushrooms that somehow showed up on my doorstep. So I used those 12 hours later and got the same feeling. The problem was I messed up my instructions there and I didn't wait the 5 days. So after getting 1.5 days basically of headache-free time, I was then on a scramble to find more mushrooms. That being something that I'd even tried looking for since the late 60s. Luckily, I had 2 kids in college. And some of my tuition money finally paid off. So when I got my new supply of mushrooms, I followed the original orders, took a dose of mushrooms, waited 5 days, took another one, and it ended my cycle. The thing about psilocybin and LSD and the other things we're going to talk about here is all the treatments that are out there and available for cluster headache patients right now is they will treat one attack. They will not treat the cycle. So if you're going to have 6 attacks a day for 6 weeks, you can take a shot of Imitrex so that day you only have 5 attacks, but the rest of the 6 weeks you're going to end up having all the regular amount of attacks. And what they've also found is many of these medications that people are using are actually extending the cycles, making the headaches more intense, and adding the number of headaches to the day, which is very sad because the people will have these injections that they can take for the headache, and when they're in the type of pain that Chuck was on the screen there, they have to decide whether or not they're going to treat that one headache and possibly make the cycle worse, or if they're going to try to get through that attack without anything at all. And it's a very long hour while you're watching the clock, waiting for the attack to end. So I had my own Independence Day. I started growing my own mushrooms. And the first cycle that I broke was in January. I was scheduled for my next cycle in October. And what we had talked about doing early on was taking maintenance doses in between the cycles to see if we could keep the cycle from ever starting. And that's what I did that 4th of July. I figured, well, if I'm going to take 2 doses 6 months apart, then the normal days for doing that would be the 4th of July and New Year's Eve. So they've worked out very well for holidays for me. What happened was after I took care of that cycle and one more that I stopped from ever starting, I formed Clusterbusters and really didn't know what I was getting into other than the fact that I knew that what a few of us were experiencing was something that every cluster sufferer should know about. And we were obviously getting a lot of flack online from a lot of people that, obviously we were just there for the drugs. So it's been quite a ride with that. But our original logo there, just a little quick point here is, if you remember my 2 doctors' name, it was a pink shark mark and flash. So I got a little flash of lightning on the shark's emblem there. And then to show how international this actually is, we have the flag of the Dominican Republic and of Scotland, where Flash is from. And here's a picture of what drives me and keeps me moving on this. This is my grandson, one of my grandsons. People with cluster headaches, the biggest fear that they can have is not the pain, but seeing one of their loved ones have clusters. And there is about a 10 times higher chance of someone in my family getting clusters than someone not in my family. So that's what really keeps me moving here, is trying to find something before, God forbid, anything happens to my grandkids. So I started building this organization called Clusterbusters, built a website, and which wasn't easy in itself. The first website that we put up, the website owner started getting phone calls and emails threatening that she was going to be turned into the police as a drug smuggler, and you name it. She finally ended up having to give up ownership of the site, so I just took that on myself also. But we started data collection from everybody that tried this treatment, collecting every bit of information we could on the treatment, how well it worked, how well it may not have worked, what other medications they might have been on, and so forth. And that was also something else that we had on Irrowwood that helped us a lot in the initial data collection. Put out some quality of life surveys, worked the message boards as much as we could. Again, the treatment refinements. There aren't any books where you can go and read about what the best way of doing this is, what dose size should be. We're basically starting from scratch. Trying to do a little bit of fundraising because we knew what we eventually wanted to do with this, and continue to collect all the anecdotal reports from everybody that was willing to tell us that they actually consumed mushrooms or LSD in email or on a message board. So we went from being patients to test subjects, and we really did, there were really some extraordinary people involved that did a lot of work, a lot of research. Most people were trying mushrooms because they were the easiest to get a hold of. If they didn't buy them, then they were able to grow them. Some were able to use LSD, but not nearly as many, just because it was so much harder to find. You have to remember that most of these people that are doing this right now are at the, they had gotten to the point where, all right, I'll try that, I'll try anything. And that's usually in their 40s or 50s when they've tried everything else. One thing that we ended up trying, those are Hawaiian baby wood rose seeds, which contain LSA. And the way we found that out was somebody in Holland was actually using the mushrooms. He wasn't able to completely break his cycle. He was only getting about 80% there. His wife did some research online, decided to try the LSA, and he was able to break his cycle that had been going on for about 20 years. One thing about this treatment, and we try to tell all of our people, is hallucinations are not a problem. The doses that we have people use and that seem to work the best are much smaller than a recreational dose. We aren't looking for people to take a dose that's going to have them talking to a deer or playing cards with a deer. You just can't trust them. So, but the doses are small. As far as the psilocybin mushrooms, it's about 1.5 grams of dried mushrooms, and mostly you're supposed to get to about the giggle point, and you're good to go. What we continue to do is build our case, because what we wanted to do was we wanted to get some research out there. We wanted somebody other than somebody named Flash and Pink Shark Mark and my name of Pink Floyd. It's one thing to take some advice from some people on the internet about your health, but when people with those types of names are telling you to take LSD for your headaches, some people like a little bit more information and a little bit more of a qualified person telling them that. So what we were wanting to do was go and get some research done so that somebody other than us, could tell them that, yes, there is a reason you should be doing that, and yes, it does work. One of the other things that we were doing was, as soon as we got online, I started getting a lot of emails and a lot of phone calls. And at this point, one of the phone calls that I got was from a woman that called me up and just wanted to know that if there was any validity at all to this treatment, because her boyfriend was out in the backyard with a loaded shotgun, and if there was nothing else that she was going to be able to find, he was going to pull the trigger. I was able to convince her that yes, it is valid. We would be able to help him. She went out and got him and brought him in and put him on the phone, and he's been part of the organization ever since. A few of the hurdles that I was told that we were going to have to try to overcome was that we were never going to attract a quality institution that was going to be able to put their name on one of these studies. And even if we did, we would never get any respected professionals to work at that institution and put their name on it, and that we would also never find the funding to be able to do anything. And within a week of putting some of this information out on the internet, I had gotten an email from someone who said, "I want to fund your research." And at that point, I hadn't even started a bank account yet. So I didn't respond to that. And a week later, I got an email saying, "I don't think you understand, I really want to fund this research." So I answered the email, and it ended up turning into a $50,000 donation, which set up basically everything that came after that, as far as our initial funding. So then the hard part started, and I packed up a few people, and we headed to Boston. And one place we stopped at was MAPS and Rick Doblin, who has been a huge help in this, introducing us into this community, helping a great deal with fundraising, and helping in many ways along the way. And those are a few of us sitting out at Rick's house. I hope Rick doesn't mind me showing a picture of his house. But one of the people that accompanied me to Boston that day was the guy that was called out of his backyard and set his shotgun down. Okay. So we ended up going to Harvard, trying to make our case. One of the first questions was, why the psychiatry department? And we showed them that clip that I just showed to you, and that friend of mine, Chuck, before he was originally diagnosed with cluster headaches, he was put into a mental institution for 6 months because they felt that no one could be in that much pain without faking. So he was strapped down without any treatments for his headaches for about 6 months before he was finally properly diagnosed with cluster headaches, and they apologized and sent him on his way. We collected a couple hundred reports from people, took the survivor with me from Washington, and that check to get us going. These are a couple of testimonials from people that have treated their headaches with psilocybin or LSD. This guy, while tripping, I was overwhelmed by a feeling of profound health, and I haven't had a single headache since. The first part of that is very important about how he was feeling. This guy took 3 grams of mushrooms in October, and my 2-year-plus migraine seems to be gone. We've kind of kept it a little bit on the down low as far as that these also do treat mushrooms, because there's a $9 billion pharmaceutical market out there that treats migraines and cluster headaches that isn't really looking for something that people can take once or twice a year and not have to take again. Here's somebody that's in the UK that was at one point able to jump on his bicycle and ride down to the corner market and buy his mushrooms until a couple of years ago they made them illegal in the UK, which is one of the things that also led us to looking into the LSA seeds, because people were now treating their headaches with mushrooms and now weren't able to get them anymore. There's have one thing to sum up this ramble. Thank God that I found out about this treatment. I'm back to living a normal life, and it makes life easier for me, my wife, and my 2 little girls. What we've been trying to do is obviously spread the word. We've gotten into the medical and the professional community. A big breakthrough for us was getting that case series, which was the original set of information that we brought to Harvard, and getting that published in neurology. Made a presentation at a headache research summit. Made Lancet, Nature magazine, written up a chapter in psychedelic medicine, and we just made a presentation at the International Headache Society in Philadelphia. This was the abstract from neurology that was actually, most of this work was done by Dr. Andrew Sewell, who is, I believe, still in the audience here, which was really the foundation for the work that we've been able to do after that. It says 22 of 26 psilocybin users reported that psilocybin aborted attacks. 25 of the 48 and 7 out of 8 LSD users reported cluster period termination, which meant it completely ended the cycle. No more headaches that cycle. Made the LA Times. My wife wasn't real happy about my face being on the cover of the LA Times, saying that I grow my own mushrooms and take them on the 4th of July and New Year's Eve. And yeah, my one grandson actually made a door knocker hanger that said "Welcome DEA" and hung that on the front door. We were in the Chicago Sun-Times. One of the things that I felt was very important here was most of these people have never tried any hallucinogens in their lives, and they were scared on that end. They were also scared about their jobs if somebody was going to come knocking on their door. We just felt somebody needed to be the point man here, and if they were going to come and get anybody, they were going to come and get me first. So as long as I'm out here talking, then they can rest at ease. And we've been in the papers in Italy and Norway. We actually made 2 House episodes. I don't know if any of you watch TV or watch the TV program House, but he was actually the first doctor to prescribe LSD for migraines and psilocybin for cluster headaches, and did that in 2 different episodes. It says October in 2009 for National Geographic, but it's now going to be, they just announced, I believe it's November 3rd on the National Geographic channel. There's going to be a special on LSD, which concludes with our work with psilocybin and LSD, and also one other compound. Just finished last week with our 4th annual convention in Chicago, which our goal there is to try to bring the psychedelic research together with traditional medicine and introduce them both and show them all that there's something to be learned from the other side. It was a very successful conference this year. Had some of the top headache specialists attending and presenting at this conference. 4 or 5 years ago, they wouldn't even answer my email if it had the word psilocybin in it. These are basically the conventional medicine options that they have. Imitrex injections, they're all ergotamine-based, basically. And brain surgery. They're doing a new one now called deep brain stimulation, where they drill a hole in the top of your head and drop a couple electric leads into your brain. You can see there, the close similarities in nature to the what we're using with the psilocybin and serotonin, which is a natural substance which runs through our bodies and is also what they base some of the conventional medications on. All we're doing is basically giving some people some new options with psilocybin, LSA, LSD. The picture on upper right is where some of the people end up going now. That's one of the British Virgin Islands where you can go to, I think it's Mambo's Hut or something on the beach and get your dose of psilocybin. I stretched this just a little bit, but on the top picture there, I think there's 18 bottles of pills there. I was actually once on 15 prescriptions at one time. So it's pushing it a little bit there, but at this point, that 1 month supply has been replaced with a year's supply of psilocybin capsules. My maintenance dose is 3 capsules which keeps me going for another 6 months. Most of the advancements in cluster research has actually been done by cluster sufferers themselves. It is a rare disease. There isn't a lot of research being done on it. We have people working on oxygen delivery systems. We're finding other things that are non-prescription that do help. Ginger does help sometimes. Getting down the list of psychedelics. And then the last one on that list is BOL, which is bromo LSD, which I call the Republican psychedelic because it's non-hallucinogenic. This is the, you can't really see it too well there, but that was the deep brain stimulation. There was a couple of wires going down to his brain and a medical pack tucked into his skin under his chest. What we're working on now is trying to change some priorities. There's very little money spent on psychedelic treatment of clusters, and all the money that is being spent on that is coming through Clusterbusters, which for the most part is coming directly from the sufferers themselves. If I had the money from the 18th green at the San Diego golf course, I could do an awful lot of research. Okay. Got just a couple last slides here. What we're doing is we're still pushing forward with psilocybin and clusters at Harvard. What we just finished, and which hasn't actually been announced yet other than at the Clusterbuster convention and here, is we've been working with bromo LSD. It was given to 5 cluster headache patients, and they had amazing results. The only person that did not break his cycle was one that would not quit drinking and didn't follow the other parts of the protocol. This is the BOL research. It's incredible where this research has led us to something that is non-hallucinogenic, and it does seem to work as well for the physical side of it. And it didn't take very long for a possibility of some funding to come up for this, just because it was non-hallucinogenic. Last thing I want to talk about is with the psilocybin, what is also happening with these people is once they break the cycle, not only have they ended the pain, but they all seem to report a completely changed attitude about their cluster headaches themselves and their life. And I really do believe that the psilocybin is probably treating a post-traumatic stress disorder. You can imagine some of the fear that they have even when they're not in cycle as far as where the next headache is going to be coming from. And it takes away a great deal of fear. So that's my story, and that's where we're at, continuing with the research. And yeah, if anybody has any rich relatives that have either kicked you out of the family or not, they can look us up and help us continue this research. Thank you.
Who has some comments or questions? Anyone?
Hi. Just a quick question: does it matter when you take the psilocybin or the LSD in the cycle? Is it if it happens in the middle of, say, an outbreak like the gentleman in the video was experiencing? Is there a time when it's most effective? Does it stop a headache in its tracks, or maybe you covered it, but I didn't get that.
Well, most people, when they come to me, are in the middle of their cycle and they have nothing that's working. So most of the people that are breaking their cycles for the first time end up needing to take 2 or 3 doses, and they are able to break the cycle. So they may go, 10 days to end the cycle rather than waiting 3 or 4 months for it to end.
Wow.
What we find works very well is if you take a maintenance dose in between your cycles, it will either completely postpone that cycle or they'll set you up so that if you do feel anything coming on, you can take a small dose and stop the cycle from starting. So it can break the cycle and it could also stop it from actually beginning. So.
Thank you.
I'm sure there are different theories about psychedelics' mechanism of action. So I was wondering what, if any, research has been done on that, and what is the most probable one?
As far as why this is working? Well, I've asked that question to an awful lot of people, and there aren't a lot of answers just because there hasn't been a lot of research as far as physical changes and why it's actually working. It appears that the psilocybin may change the shape of those receptors for a longer period of time so that they don't accept the signals that they would normally be accepting for the cluster attacks. So that is one of the key things that we're looking for in the research, is to tell us why this actually works and for so long. So.
Thank you. Question over here.
Hi, you mentioned the trigeminal nerve in your PowerPoint, and I was wondering if there's any connection between cluster headaches and trigeminal neuralgia and potential treatments for trigeminal neuralgia.
Right. There are some similarities. One very interesting thing, I talked to a guy that has trigeminal neuralgia. He's been trying to treat it for 40 years. He was one of the top researchers in the country for headaches. And all that time he was suffering from trigeminal neuralgia, which he couldn't treat. I finally talked him into trying psilocybin for the first time when he was 66 years old. And it was the first thing that he had tried in 40 years that actually stopped the pain in his face. So there are some similarities, but there is also some sort of a profound effect on the nerve pain. So, my guess is that there's probably an awful lot of things that this could lead to as far as being able to treat the pain.
Thank you.
And Bob, you probably are well aware of this, but I spoke to someone at Harvard Medical School some time ago, and apparently they're quite willing to do a study to find out what exactly is the relationship and value of psychedelics for cluster headaches. And their biggest problem is funding, because there's someone there and they've seen your abstract and are ready to go except for funding. And their biggest problem is that right now is when typically a big pharmaceutical corporation would step in to spend that $10 million or so that it would take to get this thing through the cycle when it became a prescribable drug. But in this particular case, it doesn't make economic sense for any of the pharmaceutical corporations because neither LSD nor psilocybin could be patented. They were discovered long ago, and so there'd be no economic incentive for them. So I'd only mention in terms of the fundraising needed to be done, it does need to be done privately. The usual sources for getting something like this accomplished in the pharmaceutical community don't exist for this, and that there is a prestigious institution that's looked at what needs to be done and is willing to do it if a donor can step forward.
Yep. That is our biggest hurdle ahead is, as soon as we prove that this does work and it can only needs to be done twice a year, to try to find someone to handle that funding, the $10 or $15 million that it might take to bring this to market. What they would actually be doing is approving a medication that's going to replace, instead of taking 1,000 pills a year, you're going to be taking 4 pills a year. So the profit margins are certainly not there for the way things are set up for the pharmaceutical industry right now. So at this point, our hope is that someone will help with that funding to get us over that hump. At some point, maybe it's not going to be a prescription, and maybe it's just going to be a treatment that you can get at a clinic somewhere. So that, that's going to answer one large question the government always has about diversion. So if we can get something approved where we can get into a clinic and use it there, that's going to help a lot. But yes, our funding for that next step is going to definitely be the largest hurdle. But we've managed to overcome everyone up to this point, and it just really does seem to have a life of its own. So hopefully it's going to be there.
Okay, one last question we have time for.
Yeah. Okay. I used to suffer from stress headaches. I think that's what they were. I'd have them for a week at a time, and mostly a lot of vomiting and the ice pick thing. Mm-hmm. And only one time I was able to get rid of it without Imitrix or Furanol, and it was a 5-hour phone conversation with my shaman teacher at the time, where he worked through with me. He hardly said anything, but there was some kind of experience that I had. And I think that speaks to this medicine, that it is a natural shaman, and that's so powerful that we have access to this. What he did for me is what this has done for you, and somebody said we can't have the word magic, but I think it is magical and miraculous. And congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, thank you, Bob. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.